Hi, it's Shayna, also known as Shayna Lines Designs. In this video, I will show you how to do a provisional cast on with waste yarn that can be removed later, leaving live stitches in your work. What you'll need is a knitting needle in your project size, a crochet hook that's a similar size. Mine happens to be a little bit bigger than my project needle, and I find that that works just fine, and some smooth waste yarn in a contrast color to what you'll be working on. The first thing I do is I make a slip knot in my waste yarn, and I make it long enough that I can hold the tail on my left needle. I just want to say there are many ways to do this. This is how I do it. I hold this yarn like I'm about to knit English style. I'm holding the tail end in my left hand and place my crochet hook on top of my knitting needle. And what I do, really the motion I do, is I'm sort of acting like I feel like I'm knitting a stitch. I wrap my yarn around and then I pull that loop through. And now I have one stitch provisionally cast on. Do it again. Two. And you see what I'm doing each time? I'm sort of repositioning my hands, but I'm wrapping around and pulling through. So I will go for however many I need on this project. And so I find this works well for me because it feels kind of like a knit motion. So because I am a knitter and it feels not too cumbersome to me. So let me sort of move it up a little closer. How many do I have? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. I want a couple more. And so what's happening is I have this, my knitting needle is basically inside this crochet chain I'm making. As I said, the way that I think about it, it sort of almost feels like I'm knitting the stitches on, which feels convenient and comfortable to me. When I've reached the number that I need, usually you can make a few extra loops, and there's a few different ways to do it. You can just make you can continue to crochet. This is always a little funny to me. You can continue to crochet these loops on the left needle. I've just made like 3 more. And then, but I want to show you what I usually do. The reason you do this is because when you're done using the provisional cast on, you can pull from this end and the loops just pull off one at a time. I'm going to show you what I usually do. And what I usually do is I just make a few more, make sure I'm not in there crooked. I just make a few more crochet loops on the needle because I find this, again, to be a little bit easier for me to process how to do it when I'm working them around the needle. And then I will take, so now I have enough. I've made a nice long loop and I've pulled my end right through. And then I will, I'll count however many I need for my project. Let's see. And then I actually just take the rest of them and I slide them right off. So now I will usually state in my projects that I want you to start working on the side where you ended the provisional cast on. I'll show you what that looks like. I'll get a few rows in, and then I'll actually show you what happens when I remove the waste yarn. Before I show you that, I want to just show you what it looks like to knit right off of these loops right here. So as I said, I'm going to start my work where I've ended the crochet chain. And I just begin to knit as if this were my my first row, that it was in my main color, whatever it is. I just knit off of that, And sometimes when I'm knitting, I actually capture the tail. I recommend not capturing the tail when you're working from a provisional cast on, because it'll make it just a little trickier to to pull out the waste yarn at the end. Ask me how I know. So I've come across the whole way. In many of my patterns, I ask you, I have you slip one with yarn in front at the end of the row. It's important that you don't do that on the cast on row, because it's going to be much harder to take things out later. But now I can tell which is the front and the back because of the way the yarn meeting looks. So this looks like a clean edge, and if I just flip it over, you can kind of see that the color change between my two colors happens on the back, and that's how I know that that is the wrong side of the work. Okay, I've knit a bit, and although the piece isn't quite done, I figured I would just show you how to remove the waste yarn right now. So I can tell this side right here is where I started knitting. That's where I've left off the tail of my provisional cast on. So this is where I'm going to remove the waste yarn. So what I'm going to do, I have a nice long needle here, so I'm using the same needle. If needed in my project, I could insert a different needle here, but this is what I'm doing. So I have pulled the last stitch through this final loop, and so sometimes I like to just use my needle to take that apart. And now this is really neat. What ends up happening, let me figure out if I can show you right here. I can start to pull this apart, and the loops will just pop right off. So I can see there's many different ways to do it. Because I've used a contrast color, it's kind of easy to see where my stitches go. And so I'll insert, what I like to do is one at a time. I insert my needle into that live stitch, and then I pull the next loop, and then I like to do it sort of right around the same time. You can kind of pop off the whole provisional cast on in one go. But so pulling it apart, it seems like I've sort of split that waste yarn stitch. No worries. I'm going to hold it to the left side. And now, let's see if I'm kind of zoomed in right here. As I go, I like to capture that stitch. This time I've let it sort of pop off. You can see I can insert my needle right there. I've got 3 of my live stitches, and then I'll just keep going one at a time, and each time I pull out my crochet chain, it is allowing me to put one more stitch back on my needle. And so the reason that I like this version for my work better than other versions is because it leaves the stitches live and ready for action. And it doesn't add an additional row. So there are times that I may use something that I do prefer to have that additional row, or that actually works in my work. But in this case, this is what works for what I need. So let me just see, this last one can be a little funny. Pull it through. I don't know where I just threw that yarn. And so now all of these stitches are live, and they're back on my needle. And so if needed, depending on what I'm doing, I can knit off in this direction. I often use this to join pieces within garter stitch work. But I like that my stitches are not distorted. I like that it works for me. So I hope you might give it a try.